Looking at our handout, yesterday we talked about the Greeks yesterday. That's what we looked at and we talked about yesterday. And when we looked at the Greeks, we kind of like talked about all the different ways that the Greeks have influenced us. And we kind of settled talking about a guy who conquered everything on the map that's going to be projecting on the screen. But even without the map on the screen, like the most important Greek guy by name is Alexander the Great, right? And so Alexander the Great is who we are finishing up talking about with his influence that he had. And one of the things we talked about with Alexander the Great is that everywhere he went, he didn't just like bring his army, but what else spread everywhere he went? Greek culture, right? There's a vocabulary word for the spreading of Greek culture. That word is Hellenization. It's on the board. We talked about it. Hellenization. It's the spread of Greek culture. It's the spread of Greek language. And it turns out that this Greek guy, or actually he wasn't even Greek, he was Macedonian. He was like half Greek or semi-Greek. But everywhere he went, he spread Greek culture. A couple of examples of that. I think we looked briefly at this yesterday. This is a inscription from Afghanistan. So it's like stone. And there's two languages. On the very bottom, it's Aramaic. And the top, it's Greek. It turns out in Afghanistan, a country that has been in the news recently, the country where Al-Qaeda planned and practiced 9/11, they spoke Greek there 300 years before Jesus was born. This is an example of Hellenization. One of the best examples, though, has to do with artwork. And I think we talked briefly about this yesterday. When you think about like religious jewelry, for example, let's say that you're a Christian, but you don't want to like carry around a statue of Jesus to let people know that you're a Christian. What simple thing do we put on jewelry that says I'm a Christian? A cross, right? And in the same way, Buddhists originally never, ever, 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 ever had statues of the Buddha at first. They would have symbols of the Buddha, like the most common would be like footprints, with this idea that you're following in the footsteps of the best teacher who's ever lived, the Buddha, the best teacher who ever lived. But when the Greeks came, when Alexander the Great came to Afghanistan, when Alexander the Great came to Pakistan, there was a lot of Buddhists there. And they started to look at the Greeks, and the Greeks have statues of gods. And then the Buddha said, you know what we want? We want a statue of our guy, too. And so here's a statue of the Buddha, but he's actually wearing a toga, which is like a Greek item of clothing. We do not see any statues of the Buddha until the Greeks show up, and they bring their statues of their gods. So this is an example of how Greek culture is influencing Central Asians. Make sure on your handout, if you don't have it, Greeks influence statues of who? The Buddha. The Buddha. Another example of Hellenization is this picture on the screen. This picture on the screen, it says this comes from a book, and it comes from the Bible. So you might well know that the Bible is typically divided into two parts. Everything before Jesus is called the Old Testament. Jesus is born. Everything after that is called the New Testament. And by the way, what ethnic group wrote the Bible? Jews did. What's the language of the Jewish people? Hebrew. But this picture, this is from a copy of the Bible going back to the year 200. Jesus was crucified about the year 33, just to give you a ballpark of where we're at. So Jesus lived about in the 30s. That's when he was active. And Jesus dies about 33. And this is a copy of the Bible going back to the year 200. This is from the gospel. This is from the gospel that tells you about Jesus' life. It's from Egypt. But listen, when we think about Egypt, we've talked about this before. What's the type of writing we famously think of ancient Egypt for? Hieroglyphics, right? Is that hieroglyphics? No. What language is that? That's Greek, which is weird because, again, this is what they spoke in Egypt. In Egypt, for hundreds of years, if you and I went to Egypt in the year 200, Egyptians are speaking Greek to one another. This book, the Bible written in Egypt, was written in Greek in the year 200, written by Jews. Jews in Egypt spoke not Hebrew, like their cultural language, they spoke Greek instead. Why are Jews in Egypt speaking Greek? Because of Hellenization. Because everywhere Alexander the Great went, he brought his language with him. What did they speak in Mexico in the year 1491? What language was in Mexico in the year 1491? What language do they speak there today? Spanish. Okay, so why not Spanish? Why is there a hesitation when I'm asking you? Because why, Car? Because I don't have a clue. Okay. Say what you said again? The Spanish haven't colonized yet. Okay, so what did they speak in Mexico and in Cuba and Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic before Columbus? What did they speak there? Like broadly, without knowing the specific name. What kind of languages do they speak in Mexico and Guatemala and El Salvador? What kind of languages do they speak? Native American language, like whatever that is, right? Whether it's Aztec or Maya or Olmec or whatever it was, they spoke Native American languages. But the fact they speak Spanish in Puerto Rico and Mexico, it's evidence that, you know what, someone came and brought their language, the Spanish came. What else did the Spanish bring to Mexico and Colombia and Cuba and the DR and Puerto Rico? What else did they bring other than their language? What else did the Spanish bring with them? What else do all those countries have in common other than the Spanish language? That's an element of culture. What else do all those have in common? Religion? What do you mean? They're all Catholic. Every single one of those is, and to this day, most of the Hispanics, you know, if they are religious, are probably, not universally, but they're probably Catholic. That's another example of how when people go to a place and they conquer and they beat up, they spread their language, they spread their religion, they spread their culture. The Spanish did it. Everywhere they speak Spanish used to be owned by Spain. Mexico used to be, Guatemala, El Salvador, Argentina, Uruguay, Peru, Puerto Rico, DR. And in the same way, if they speak Greek in Egypt, that reminds me, Egypt was ruled by the Greeks for a period of time, starting with Alexander the Great. Finally, on this handout, it says on the handout that sadly for this empire, upon his death, his empire, it broke up. Alexander the Great died at age 32. He died young. And at age 32, there's no one left to take over in the same vein as Alexander the Great. He drank way too much. And he had been abusing alcohol for years and years. And that's not like shocking, because think of celebrities, think about movie stars, think about singers in American culture whose death prematurely included drugs or overdosing. Like, it happens literally all the time. It happens all the time. So Alexander the Great, age 32, he broke up, and after his death, his empire fragments into all those colors. Egypt is still ruled by Greek people, just a different family. Asia Minor still ruled by Greek people, just so his empire breaks up. Think about like the Chicago Bulls, the 90s era Chicago Bulls, like if you follow NBA, like some of the best basketball team ever assembled. But what happens to the Chicago Bulls after Scottie Pippen, after Michael Jordan, and after Dennis Rodman leave that roster? How are the Chicago Bulls today? They're like trash, right? Like, okay, they're getting better, but that doesn't mean that you're good. If you lost every game last year and you won 5 games this year, you're getting better. But no one's like super excited to buy a Chicago Bulls jersey in 2021. Or maybe one of you are. Okay, in the same way, but you get what I'm saying. It's not the same. After Alexander dies, it can't keep the empire together. And what we have is this empire, it breaks up. No one can replace Alexander the Great. But what we're going to talk about, but another government replaces Alexander the Great. On our new handout, we're going to be talking today about the Roman Empire. And on our new handout, we have this massive empire on your map that you should become familiar with today and tomorrow. This massive empire, if you look at it, what is this island? What island is that in the upper left-hand corner? What island is this? What country is this today?
Britain.
That's Great Britain, and this is England. So this is all one country. Whatever color you want to call this, I've had people say that's coral. I didn't know that's like the official color. People said it's coral. I don't know. Whatever. I would say like orangey color, right? Whatever color someone said salmon earlier today, whatever color you want to call that. This is the Roman Empire. And this Roman Empire, it goes from England all the way again to Egypt. This Roman Empire, it includes this land right here. What ethnic minority lives here that believe in just one God? The Jews, right? This is Israel. This is a huge empire. And I mean, look at your very first line. It says it would start on the Italian peninsula, but it would eventually total, you're going to write down what it says on the slide, 1 million square miles. That's how big the Roman Empire is, and that may be hard for you to get a grasp of. So I'm going to show you this next image. This next image, I want to put the Roman Empire on top of the United States to kind of like gauge how big, what does that even mean to be 1 million square miles? To orient you again, right here, this is England, this is Spain, Portugal, here's France, there's the Italian peninsula, here's Greece, this is all of North Africa. This is Egypt. There's where the Jews live. This is modern day Mesopotamia. This is Turkey. Listen, if the Roman Empire was a country today, it would be the same size as if our country went from Cuba to Canada. This is one country. Now listen, maybe some of you have ever like taken a road trip to Disney World. Who's driven to Disney World, Orlando? How long did it take you to get there in a car going 70 miles an hour? Too long. 3 hours? Negative? No. I don't know. I've never made. Yeah, maybe I could see that. I think you're still underestimating from South Carolina. How many hours though? Like I think 12 is a ballpark. It took you 12 hours going 70 miles an hour to get to Florida, which isn't like, I mean, we're like, it's straight I-10 to get to Florida. It's not like we're going to Maine. It took you 12 hours going 70 miles an hour. Listen, this is an empire bigger than the United States. Before car, before telegraph, before telephone, and they kept this empire together for hundreds of years. I'm going to tell you, that's impressive. This is why the Roman Empire is like a famous thing. This is why like it gets a lesson. The Roman Empire is a big deal. So let's talk a little bit about the Roman Empire today being a big deal. I mean, literally, it's a big deal. It says on the second line that the Roman Empire, there is something that makes the Roman Empire a little bit easier to travel. In fact, what makes up that middle part of the Roman Empire? The Mediterranean Sea. Now, like, certainly that's faster than like walking, but even then, like boats are faster, but still not like, oh, this is great. If you've ever been like on the, where does it go? If you go to Galveston, there's a ferry. Where does that ferry go to? And you wait really long to get on that thing, and you're like, why is this even a good idea? And you get mad at your parents. You're like, this wasn't worth it. Where does that ferry go to in Galveston?
Bolivar.
It goes to the Bolivar Peninsula, right? And so you go, and like it's cool sometimes, but then sometimes like super hot, and then you have to turn off your air conditioning, and it's like, okay, let's go to the top. But when you're on the ferry, is it like that's so fast? Like certainly faster than walking, but are you like just like we're just making time? Like, I mean, it's faster, but it's not like super fast. And so yeah, they have the Mediterranean, that's cool, but still it's a huge empire. We want to write down on that second blank this body of water. It's all along the Mediterranean Sea. If your eyes are not so great and you haven't upgraded your glasses or your whatever prescriptions, Mediterranean is spelled M-E-D, Iterranean. Mediterranean. If you speak Spanish, I need your help. What's another word for like the earth or the ground in Spanish? What's the word for that? What is the word?
Yeah, why did you what did you mean?
How do you say that? What's the earth for, the word for the ground or the earth? What does it say? Tierra. So tierra, right? So look at that word Mediterranean. You're going to notice two words that are similar. The word tierra is in there, the earth, and what's the first part? Probably mean MED, like the middle. And the reason why they called it the Mediterranean is for them, this is like the middle of the earth. Like from their worldview, we know about this, we know about that. We don't know much about farther down, but this is what we do know, that this sea is the middle of the earth. It's the middle of the tierra. It's the middle of the earth. It's the Mediterranean. It's a huge part for them. And the third line, it says that Rome originally started off as, you're going to write down the word republic. It started off as a republic. Now that's a kind of a funny word, an important word. And actually that word republic is a word you hear every day at LaPorte High School about the fourth hour of the day. Where do you hear that word republic? The pledge? What do you mean? Tell me about that. What does the pledge say? Let me scan through the pledge. What does the pledge say? Oh my gosh, you pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the for which it stands, right? So we pledge to this thing every day. You pledge to it. Ortiz, what's a republic? We're pledging to it every day. What is a republic? And why are you pledging allegiance to this thing if we don't even know what it is? Ortiz, don't disappoint me right now. Yeah, so no, not great. And I'm glad that you actually know the definition of federalism, which you're using, which is awesome. A republic is a type of democracy. It's where we're voting for people and they vote to make laws. So none of your parents voted for the permitless open carry gun law. Like in Texas now, you can open carry without like special training. Like as long as you can legally own a gun, you can like walk around with like a gun at the gas station and you don't need a special permit. None of your parents voted for that. Some of your parents voted for the people who voted for that. That's a republic. That there's people who represent you. And actually, that's the kind of government that Rome was originally. Below that, they were run by, you'll write down the Senate. They were run by the Senate. Now, that word should look also familiar to you because guess what we in the United States also have? We have a Senate. Now, I've had nothing but a lot of bad answers to these follow-up questions all day. But I have a feeling by looking in your eyes that this class, this is where it's all going to be different. That there's going to be good answers to these questions I'm about to give you. I know it. I know Mr. Lotta in the back. He's been giving me some good stuff. I know this is going to happen. So here's my question. Simple question. How many senators are there in the United States? Now, what would you say, randomly calling someone sitting in front of me who put their head down briefly? Becca, how many senators would you say? U.S. government, just throw out a number. No, because I've heard all kinds of numbers. Okay, I don't know. Any guesses? What do we got? 100? Does anyone like agree? I mean, 100 senators? 52. With confidence yelled out 52. Who else? What else we got? 52 for the whole country of 330 million? We agree with that? 104? What else? There's a bit of a debate how many states there are. People are yelling out Puerto Rico's a state. Real quickly, is Puerto Rico a state?
No, it's a territory.
Now, some people, when I asked that question, broke eye contact with me because you weren't sure. You're like, don't be an idiot. I don't know the answer. You know, people are thinking, is Puerto Rico a state?
No.
It is not. Are they American?
Yeah, it's a American territory.
So is Coach Torres, our baseball coach, a U.S. citizen or not?
Yes. Yeah.
So it's complicated. Puerto Rico is part of the United States. You are an American citizen in Puerto Rico, but it's not a state. And there's actually other parts. I don't know if you've heard of this. There's a place called the Virgin Islands. Maybe you've heard of that name. There's something called the American Virgin Islands. It's part of the United States. If you're born in the American Virgin, you're a U.S. citizen, you just can't vote. And there's other places too. There's a place called Guam. Guam is closer to Hong Kong than LA. Like if you were in spring break in Guam, you might decide, oh, we're going to go somewhere. We're going to go to Tokyo. It's closer for you to go to spring break in Tokyo than for you to come to LA. If you live in Guam, like I have friends who live there, they're U.S. citizens. You are an American citizen living in the United States, and you are within a flight to South Korea rather than a flight that's meaningful to California. Go ahead. They cannot, they do vote. They get, I think, one electoral vote. I think that's right. I'll have to double check that. It gets weird. DC also is not a state, but they really want to be a state. And like they have on their license plates, you know, like we have like Texas-y things on our license plates. Their license plate in DC, it says the 51st state because they're like really like pumped up about becoming it. Like they want to be the.
They would just be a state in the middle of the state and then.
They're not a state now.
Wait, are you talking about Washington, D.C.?
Washington. So America's so confusing. We have a state called Washington, which is up in the Northwest, like Seattle. But then we have a city, which is not a state, called Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia. If you live in D.C., you don't live in any state. Washington, D.C. is in no state. It's in a district. The District of Columbia, and it's not a state. There's like 600,000 people who live there, and they don't live in any state.
So, like, if it would become a state,
it would be.
I don't even know where it's at. Is it like in the middle?
It's between Virginia and Maryland.
Okay. It's okay.
So and people want it to become a 51st state. And that's actually a debate. Like people today want that to be the 51st, but then we have to like change the flag, and then it gets, you know, it's a whole thing, you know. So I don't know. 51. It says on the handout, there was also no single ruler. There was no single ruler. Just like for us, we have 100 senators. That's correct. 100 senators, 2 per state. Turns out there's 50 states, 2 per state. Does anyone know our 2 senators? There's Ted Cruz and John Cornyn, I think. Yeah. They're both Republicans. It turns out you live in a Republican majority state. You know other senators, though. In fact, you probably know one of the most liberal senators of all, the senator from Vermont. He grew up in New York, ran for president twice, once free college, once free health care, once your support. Bernie Sanders, right? Bernie is the senator from Vermont, right? Joe Biden, before Joe Biden was Barack Obama's vice president, he was a senator from mighty Delaware. So Hillary Clinton, before she ran for president of the United States, she was the senator for the state of New York. So Hillary, well, she ran twice. She ran and lost. And kind of like when you run and lose, you kind of like, you know, that was like your time. And I mean, she did a lot of things. She was Bill Clinton's wife in the 90s. So she was the first lady. And she was active. And then she became the senator of New York. And then under Obama, her job was Secretary of State, which is like your job is to represent the U.S. to other countries. And then she thought that was enough that people would vote for her. But then, of course, famously, she lost to Donald Trump, you know. And so now that you've done your thing, there's very little, you know, you've kind of like had your shot. You're like, all right, I tried, and you're not going to try that again. So she's probably done, probably.
Doesn't take no for an answer. Bernie Sanders.
Bernie does not take no for an answer, like, because he ran twice. Like, he ran for, and the kids still love Bernie. They're still feeling the burn. You're saying free stuff. You're like, where do I vote? You know? Yeah, people love Bernie. It says on your handout, there was no single ruler, and the Senate, you're going to write down, was the voice of the people. On your handout, the Senate was the voice of the people. And so we get our idea of a Senate, we get our idea of republic from Rome. In fact, if you look at our buildings in Washington, D.C., they have columns and we have copied not only the name of the government, not only do we copy the name Senate, our buildings on purpose look like the buildings of Rome because we respect, and whatever you respect, whatever you like, you copy. So we copied Rome. But there's going to be a problem with this whole voice of the people thing. Problem is this guy on the screen, we're going to write down, the Republic was challenged by a popular general, a guy named Julius Caesar. And this guy is a problem because he is so good at what he does. He's such a good general. When you're popular, you're going to find that you get to get away with things that other people don't. Like even in your own family, maybe there's like the favorite child and you're not it. And you're like, how come like he gets to, or how come she got to? And then like the rules are different for you, you know? It's like, wait a second, like this isn't adding up, mom and dad. The favorite gets to get away with things that maybe you don't. Or maybe you're the favorite and you're just like quietly gonna like accept that. You're like, hey, you know. Julius Caesar was a popular guy. And because of that, he knew he was popular. He knew that he could like bend and break the rules and most people would be kind of like okay with it. Julius Caesar. So there was a rule that said, if you're a general, that's cool that you're a general, but we don't want you to like bring your army with you to the capital. Like in our state, like you can have the right to bear arms, but would you want teachers walking up and down the hall with guns? Or would you like classmates that own guns like walking up and down? Like, no, right? You I mean, I would feel weird if like, oh, there's Mr. Grammer with his shotgun, you know, like that would be weird, right? Okay. Some of you would like that. Some of you think that's okay. I think it'd be weird. Like, oh, there's Miss Holloway with her AK, you know, like I'd be weirded out. We don't want you to do that because of like what could happen. In the same way, there was a river that kind of divided the capital from the rest. And there was a rule that said, if you're a general, that's cool. If you're a general, you have an army, that's awesome. We really respect you. Thank you so much for your service. But you can't bring your army to cross the river because what might you try to do with your army in the capital city? You might take over. So there's a rule that said, hey, you know what? FYI, don't ever cross the Rubicon with your army. And Julius Caesar says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to cross the Rubicon with my army. And he kind of knew that like he was so popular that I could break this rule. It's going to be okay. And he was actually right. It says on the handout that by taking his army across the Rubicon River, he challenged the Republicans' government and he took over. He took over.
Did he actually like attack it, or did he just,
Yeah, he did. And he took over. He took over. And now Julius Caesar's in charge. And it's cool for a certain amount of time. But obviously not everyone's happy. Like, how are you going to feel if you were a senator? How are you going to feel if you were elected to be in charge and like this guy just brought in? How are these leaders going to feel?
That's how they would feel. That's not me. That's
Okay,
how they would
I think I have to like email your counselor now.
No,
Like,
that's not,
direct quoting him. He said, I want to,
that would be
what was your, I know it was you.
It's not me direct quoting. I don't recording.
It's literally,
Oh God.
it's literally recorded. So,
Julius Caesar said he wants to. Oh, not the senator said
Okay.
he wanted to change Julius Caesar.
okay, and actually you're 100% right here. A lot of these senators felt like that's not cool, Julius. Like, we fought and like we ran and we got elected, and now you just basically walk in with an army to get what you want. That's not right. And so it says on the handout that after a brief period of rule, he was actually assassinated. You'll write down he was assassinated on the Senate floor. He was actually assassinated on the Senate floor, meaning like he showed up to work. He's like, all right, busy day. I'm super excited. It's March 15th. It's the Ides of March. That was like what that date was called. What possibly could go wrong today on March 15th in the year 44 BCE? Well, what went wrong was he was met by a group of powerful men. Some of them were actually his friends who jumped him, basically. They held back anyone who would support him, and 60 men participated in stabbing him 23 times. Some people held him down. Some people, threw, punches and didn't stop him. But he walked, when it was all done, Julius Caesar had 23 puncture wounds on his body. That's true. I mean, I think that's a lot. Are you saying that that's... I would say 23 stab wounds that killed you is significant. But some of us in the room, it's not enough, which is... I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. So that's Julius Caesar. Now, after they kill Julius Caesar, like the senators who did, actually even some of his friends killed him, people thought, man, everyone's going to be super stoked and super happy. But people weren't, because like, even though he was kind of a jerk, people liked him. FYI, Michael Jordan was kind of a jerk teammate sometimes. But people were like willing to overlook Michael Jordan being a jerk teammate because even if Michael Jordan could be like really a jerk and talk down to you and think he was better than you and made you know it, he's Michael Jordan. And you're like, I can live with that. So it says on the handout that after his death, the Roman people were actually unhappy. Like, people were sad that their dictator died. After his death, the Roman people were unhappy. And we can maybe identify, what was the last American president we had that was like assassinated? JFK. Where did he die? Dallas. Who shot his car? Who shot JFK? So there's a guy named Lee Harvey Oswald. He had served in the U.S. Marines, and he, for reasons that are not 100% clear, he went to the second story. There's a building called, it was a book depository, it was like a library building. He set up, and as this motorcade of cars went by, he shot and killed JFK, sadly, in the head. It was terrible, and it was filmed. It was televised. And when this happened, people, when they announced it in schools, students like wept. They cried. That's because we don't have presidents popular like that anymore. Like I would be sad if something happened, God forbid, Joe, I would be sad. But like, do you think people are gonna be walking up down the halls like, I can't believe Joe Biden, or even if like Trump, some people might actually be happy, but we don't feel that way about our leaders anymore. But back then they did, and here they wept for JFK. Now, the big problem, it says on the handout, was that Caesar, when he died, he left a will. And when you leave a will, it kind of like divides up your property. And it says Caesar's will entrusted the country to this guy named Octavian. And what we know about Octavian is a complicated situation. He's an adopted son. He wasn't legally, he was not biologically his son, but he was like an adopted son. And the problem is, this guy who's supposed to like take over, he's 18 years old. And so if there were senators who didn't like Julius Caesar for taking over, there's other ones who said, I think we just like made it worse, because now like there's an 18-year-old in charge. And so it doesn't make it any easier. So Julius Caesar's so popular, so loved. In fact, we today have a month named after Julius Caesar. July, named after Julius Caesar. He's been dead 2,000 years. We still have a month named after him. And by the way, Octavian Augustus, we have a month named after him. We've got... Oh my goodness. August. We have months named after Roman emperors 2,000 years dead. So there's a problem. This guy's 18. Not everyone agrees with this. In fact, on the next line, it says he'd be challenged for control by a trusted general and a distant relative of Julius Caesar who would start a civil war. And this guy who starts a civil war because he doesn't think an 18-year-old should be in charge, you're going to write down his name. His name is Mark Antony. You can see his name is actually also one line below. You can go ahead and copy that. Now, that's cool that Mark Antony wants to do this, but it's actually not going to work out for Mark Antony. On the handout and on the slide, Mark Antony would ultimately flee to Egypt. And when he flees Egypt, he hooks up politically and sexually with the most famous Egyptian ruler you know, who is Cleopatra. He would unite against Octavian with Cleopatra. Cleopatra, though, she's not actually Egyptian. The most famous Egyptian ruler you know, not Egyptian. Because the last time that we talked about Egypt, who had conquered Egypt? The Greeks, Alexander the Great. We saw a picture of a book written in Egypt, written in Greek. She's actually Greek. She's only there because of Alexander the Great. And we'll write down she was actually a member of what was called the Ptolemy dynasty and was ethnically Greek. And despite their unity, we're going to write down on the slide, despite their unity, they were both defeated by Octavian Augustus in the year 31 BCE, 31 years before Jesus is born. Correct, and it's on the slide. Augustus would now become, we'll write down, the very first emperor. There is no more voting in the way we had. There's no more Roman Republic. Republic is gone and empire is here. If you ever watched the Star Wars trilogy, Star Wars is basically the Roman Empire. George Lucas takes Roman history of a country that had a government that had a republic, a government that had a senate, and an emperor who comes and takes over. Star Wars is basically the Roman story. Last two things in our 3 minutes we have left. Two things that become popular terms that we'll be talking about are syncretism, which is on the slide, the blending of beliefs, and Romanization, which is the spread of Roman culture and language. Just like Hellenization means everywhere the Greeks went, Greek culture went, guess what? Everywhere the Romans go, their Roman culture goes with them. So syncretism is the blending of beliefs. Romanization is on the slide. It's the spread of Roman culture and the Latin language. Tomorrow, when we get together, we're going to talk about examples of that. Finish this handout tomorrow. And tonight, there's a John Green video that you'll watch on Rome. There'll be questions to respond to. Make sure you do your crash course video. I look forward to seeing you guys all tomorrow. It's been great. It's been wonderful. You guys are the best.
You have perseverance. Who?